Unboxing the turbo for the 2015 Ford Escape. Inside the box you will find the Max Speeding Road sticker, the manual, the product catalog, exhaust flange gasket, oil return pipe gasket, metal gaskets, oil line gasket, and of course the turbocharger unit. These are the tools used in this video. Air ratchet, electric impact wrench, large torque wrench, medium torque wrench, syringe, 7mm short socket, 8mm short socket, 10mm short socket, T25 small socket, T30 small socket, 12mm long socket, 10mm Allen key, adapter, 10mm long socket, 13mm long socket, 15mm long socket, 17mm long socket, 18mm long socket, 19mm long socket, 21mm long socket, 22mm short socket, 15mm short socket, diagonal cutters, small socket extension, large socket extension, short and long, locking pliers, clip removal tool, small ratchet, medium ratchet, large ratchet, flathead screwdriver, needle nose pliers, ball joint separator, breaker bars, pry bar, and the gearbox jack. Open the hood. Remove the wiper arm nut cover. Using a 15mm short socket, remove the wiper arm nut. Remove the wiper arms. Use a T25 socket to remove the brake fluid reservoir screws. Pry off the front cover clips. Pry off the front cover. Using a 10mm socket, remove the ventilation cover bolts. Use an 8mm socket to remove the remaining bolts. Remove the ventilation cover. Remove the engine cover. Disconnect the intake air temperature sensor plug. Remove the vacuum lines. Pry off the wire harness clips. Use a 7mm socket to loosen the intake hose clamps. Unclip and remove the air filter assembly. Unclip the crankcase ventilation pipe. Use an 8mm socket to remove the turbo inlet pipe bolts. Use a 7mm socket to remove the turbo inlet pipe clamps. Use a 12mm socket to remove the engine cover mounting stud. Remove the turbo inlet pipe. This is where we previously used the 7mm socket. Disconnect the coolant temperature sensor plug and set the harness aside. Use a T30 socket to remove the exhaust heat shield bolts. Remove the exhaust heat shield. Disconnect the front and rear oxygen sensor plugs. Release the oxygen sensor clips. Use pliers to remove the turbo coolant hose clamps and remove the hose. Using a 10mm, remove the steering U-joint bolt and disconnect the joint. Loosen the wheel nuts using a 19mm socket. Lift the vehicle. Remove the wheel nuts and then remove the wheel. Remove the sway bar link nuts with a 15mm socket. Remove the weight blocks and disconnect the sway bar links. Remove the outer tie rod nuts with a 15mm socket and separate the tie rods. Lift the vehicle. Remove the engine undertray bolts with a T30 socket and remove the undertray. Remove the height sensor bracket bolts with a 8mm socket and set them aside. Remove the lower control arm ball joint nut with a 18mm socket, then separate the ball joints using a pry bar. Remove the gearbox mount bolt with a 15mm socket. Remove extension rod bolts to the front subframe using 10 and 13mm sockets. Remove the rear reinforcement bar nuts and bolts with a 15mm socket. Remove exhaust hanger bolts with a 10mm socket. Pry off transfer case and steering wire harness clips. Remove subframe bolts with a 13mm socket. Support the subframe with the gearbox jack. Remove front subframe bolts with a 15mm and a 21mm socket. Lower the subframe slightly. Remove steering heat shield bolts with a 10mm socket and remove the shield. Disconnect the steering plug and remove remaining harness clips. Cut the excess zip ties and set the steering harness aside. Continue lowering the subframe. Remove the plug from the transfer case. Remove turbo outlet hose clamps using a 7mm socket and remove the hose. Disconnect vacuum solenoid plugs. Remove vacuum solenoid hoses and blow off valve lines. Remove the nuts using a 15mm socket. Remove the exhaust clamp on the turbo using a 13mm wrench. Use a 13mm long socket with extension to remove the nuts on the catalytic converter bracket. Use a 15mm socket to remove the remaining nuts and then remove the bracket. Remove the catalytic converter. Remove turbo water lines using a 10mm Allen key. Remove turbo oil feed lines using a 17mm socket. Remove turbo oil return lines using an 8mm socket with an extension. Lower the vehicle. Remove turbocharger mounting nuts at the cylinder head using a 13mm socket. Lift the vehicle. Remove the turbocharger. Remove the old turbocharger flange gasket. Remove the turbo water lines from the old turbo. Install turbo water lines on the new turbo. Insert a bolt for the waterline bracket. Tighten the waterline bolt with the 10mm Allen key to 10 Nm. Tighten the waterline bracket bolt with a T30 socket. Install a new flange gasket and the turbocharger. Install the nuts. Tighten them with a 13mm socket. Install oil field line with a new gasket and tighten bolts to 14 Nm with a 17mm socket. Install turbo waterline gasket and bolts, torque to 14 Nm with a 10mm Allen key. Add 10 ml of engine oil into the turbo oil inlet. Install turbo oil return line with a new gasket and tighten with 8mm socket. Reconnect vacuum lines and secure clamps with pliers. Connect the vacuum solenoid plug. Put the exhaust clamp on the catalytic converter. Install the catalytic converter. Reinstall the mounting bracket. Install the nuts. Tighten the nuts using a 13 and 15mm socket. Tighten the exhaust clamp using a 13mm socket. Reattach the exhaust and install the nuts. Tighten nuts to 60 Nm. Install turbo outlet hose and secure the clamp with a 7mm socket. Lift the front subframe. Reinstall steering harness and connect the plugs. Reinstall the heat shield. Lift the front subframe. Reinstall the subframe bolts. Reinstall the exhaust hanger bolts and tighten using a 10mm socket. Reinstall the rear reinforcement bar. Tighten it using a 15mm socket. Tighten to 47 Nm. Tighten bolts using a 21mm socket. Tighten to 140 Nm. Tighten with a 13mm socket. Torque to 62 Nm. Tighten the bolts with a 15mm socket and an extension. Torque to 115 Nm. Reinstall gearbox mount bolt. Torque to 125 Nm. Reinstall remaining steering harness clips and trim the zip ties. Reinstall the transfer case harness and secure the plug. Reinstall extension rods. Tighten using a 10mm socket. Tighten using a 13mm socket. Install height sensor bolt with the 8mm socket. Install lower control arm ball joint. Tighten using an 18mm socket and then torque to 83 Nm. Remove the gearbox jack. Install engine under tray and secure with T30 socket. Lower the vehicle partially and install the outer tie rods. In with a 15mm socket. Torque to 48 Nm. Reinstall the sway bar links, weight blocks, ABS harness. Tighten with a 15mm socket and then torque to 63 Nm. Reinstall the wheels. Reinstall the nuts. Tighten using a 19mm socket. Torque them to 135 Nm. Reinstall steering U-joint and torque the bolt to 28 Nm using a 10mm socket. Connect oxygen sensor plugs. Install turbo water pipe and then secure the clamp. Install turbo heat shield and then tighten the T30 screws. Connect the coolant temperature sensor plug and secure the wiring. Install the turbo inlet pipe. Connect the crankcase ventilation. Install the mounting studs and bolts. Tighten mounting bolts with 8mm and 12mm sockets. Secure the turbo inlet hose clamp with a 7mm socket. Reinstall the fuel breather line. Install air filter housing and brake vacuum line. Connect air temperature sensor and plug. Tighten the hose clamp using a 7mm socket. Reinstall engine cover. Fill the coolant reservoir up to max. Install the ventilation cover and tighten the bolts with 8mm and 10mm sockets. Reinstall the brake fluid reservoir with a T25 socket. Reinstall the front cover. Reinstall the clips. Reinstall wiper arms. Tighten the nuts using a 15mm socket. Reinstall the covers. Close the hood.